for us to get started is if you would tell esteemed audience a little bit about you and your background in publishing thus far.
Okay. So I'm Amber Smith, and I am here talking about my third novel for young adults called Something Like Gravity. And this story follows two teenagers, one of whom has recently come out as transgender and is in the middle of dealing with a lot of very heavy stuff from his past. And the other character is grieving the loss of her older sister. And so the story is about a lot of things, but at the center of it is this love story between these two characters, Chris and Maya. And so it's all about falling in love for the first time and finding yourself in the process.
And I want to talk at length about Something Like Gravity because I really, really enjoyed that novel. It spoke to me. I've got a very dear friend in my life and I knew her daughter as a sullen, unhappy, depressed teenager. And I've now known her son after the transition as a very happy young man. I can see a bit of myself in him, and he's never been happier. And this story spoke to me because that's not just something that happens out there, that happens right here in Indiana. And I really, I identified with Chris's journey, and I think the readers will as well, because it deals with a lot of universal themes, this question of finding yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of why I wanted to focus on the love story, because love really is such a universal experience. It's something that everybody can relate to, regardless of, what your world looks like. Everybody understands love.
So let's just dive right into the book. Amber, who is the ideal reader for this story?
Oh, everyone.
I think you just pick up a copy.
Yeah, everyone should read this book. I'm kind of joking, but kind of not. So whenever I write a book, I'm always thinking of my teenage self and, what are the kinds of books I really needed when I was growing up. And that sort of guides me in the books that I write. So on one level, I'm writing it for teenagers, but on another level, I'm writing for the adults who still have these teenagers who need to be healed inside of them too. So I think a lot of my readers for all of my books actually have been both young adults and adults.
And we'll step back briefly. Who are some of the authors and some of the books that inspired you when you were younger and made you want to be an author? And were there any books that directly inspired Something Like Gravity?
Ooh, let's see. So some of the most important books for me were Speak by Laurie House Anderson. So that book came out when I was a senior in high school. And I was the first person in my school to read that book. I got it from my school librarian, gave it to me to read before she had even cataloged it into the computer system. And I
was going to say, we had it on a waiting list here.
Yeah. So she just, I remember she was actually unboxing the new books and she handed it to me and she said, why don't you give that a read over the weekend and just let me know what you think? And of course, when I look back on it, I think she really must have known I needed that book. And that book really did make a huge impact on me. And that was one of the first books I read where I felt like, wow, I am not alone. I am not the only one who has ever gone through this and has felt that, there was no one else who could understand. And so that's sort of the approach that I'm coming from when I'm writing now. But one of the books that I also read when I was a teenager that definitely influenced Something Like Gravity was Annie on My Mind by Nancy Garden. I can't remember the exact date that book came out, but it was in the 80s. So it was a very early book. And it was a love story about these two girls who fell in love with each other, and all of the things and the challenges they had to go through with their friends and school and their families. And that book was so important to me when I was a young person because, as a queer person myself, back in the 90s, there really wasn't a lot or really any books that were featuring gay people as in a positive way anyway. Or if there were gay people in a story, it really focused on only the challenges and the tragedies. And often it was, I kept reading these coming out stories, but I felt like, well, okay, but what happens in your life after you come out? And Annie on My Mind was one of the first books that I ever read that really tackled that, where the characters felt like whole, real people that had complex lives. And I don't know, that book really made an impact on me. And so when I thought about making Something Like Gravity a love story, I went back and I read that book, and it just brought back all of those feelings for me again.
Was there anything from that book that you tried to, obviously not copy, but to inspire you in the way that you wrote Something Like Gravity?
Um, I'm not sure if it was anything really specific, more than just wanting to present a relationship that was complicated and messy and beautiful and all of those things that first love tends to encapsulate. So first love is never perfect, but it's very meaningful. And that's something that I took away from Annie on My Mind.